on now, so we'll let them get online, and then we will get our webinar started. Okay, we'll get rolling in just about 1 minute. Okay, I think we're ready to get rolling. Again, thank you all for joining us this afternoon for our webinar, Using Technology in Ministry, and we're so glad to partner with KFUO, Worldwide KFUO Radio for this opportunity to talk about technology, and we're so pleased to have Reverend Jonathan Fisk with us, the new on-air personality for Worldwide KFUO Radio. Behind the radio mic, you're looking very radio official there today.
Thank you very much. It's been fun. It's my second week on the job, but I feel at home already. It's kind of neat.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, we're so glad you're with us today. And before we get rolling, just a couple of items. At the lower left-hand part of your screen, there's a chat feature. Down in that chat feature, anytime during our webinar, you who have joined us can type a question in there. And at the end, I'll keep track of those questions, and we'll do a little Q&A time with Pastor Fisk. And if you have a question or a comment, please type it in the chat feature. Also, at the very end of our webinar, just a reminder that you will receive a link to do an assessment of our webinar today, so we ask that you fill that out. We always like to learn from each event that we do how we can do things better or if things worked out well for you. We're glad to hear that. If you do have some sound problems, we apologize. We know some folks out there, because of internet connections, do have some issues with that. However, I'll remind you, if you do have any problems today technologically, this webinar and all of our webinars are archived on our website, so you can go to our website and check out that if you missed something today. So we want to remind you of that. And with that, let's begin with a word of prayer. Gracious Lord, our Heavenly Father, we give you thanks for this day. We give you thanks for the gift of serving you in your church. Lord, especially we give you thanks for the gift of technology that has opened our horizons. And while this causes some issue on occasion and can certainly be used as a tool for evil, we also know that it has opened doors for those to hear the word of the Lord in places where we might otherwise not have been able to do that, and to receive training in ways which were not accessible to us, especially in rural and small-town places. So we give you thanks for this day, for Reverend Fisk and his knowledge and wisdom he will impart with us, and for the opportunity to serve you this day and always. In the name of Christ we pray. Amen. Pastor Fisk, take it away.
Thank you very much, and thank you for asking me to speak on this matter. My knowledge on the matter is largely gleaned from personal reading. I don't claim to be the final expert, but hopefully I can start you on a journey as well to understanding more about the network reality that has come about because of the internet, how it impacts your church, your congregation, your church body, your district, and what you can do, and maybe what you don't even need to worry about doing as a result of that. It goes without saying, I think, that there's been a tremendous watershed change in the last 10 years, all because of this magical thing called the internet. You think Facebook has been around now, I think it's about 13 years, but who could imagine living without it for the most part? There's a few out there that do, but this is, the spread and movement of information is a dynamic time to be alive, and yet these tools that are at our hands now are not like the tools that came before, and they can present a bit of a problem. So I'm going to do a couple of things, maybe not what you're wanting me to do today for you, but I'll try at the end. But what I want to say right off the bat is what this presentation is not going to be about and cannot be about, and that is how to magically make the internet a thing that stops the decline of a congregation due to demographic reasons in anywhere in the country. There's no question about this right now, that both in rural America and in the cities in America, maybe more so in the cities in America, we are facing struggle, demographic decline, fewer people that are how do I say this, born into our message, right? Fewer people that are naturally looking for Lutheran churches, and our congregations are feeling the pinch of this matter. This is, of course, an opportunity for mission, but it is also one which is putting a pinch on us. And the internet, as great as it is, and as much as you can use it to make sure people find you, and also to get the message that we have out into the world, it is no magic tool for saving your congregation. And in this way, I think there's been some misguided hype about what the internet is for, as if anything that you do on the internet is just going to, again, magically make things better. It doesn't really do that. I've been doing Worldview Everlasting for years before I came to KFUO. If you know about that or not, it's a YouTube show I do twice a week, yada, yada. Millions of views at this point. And I have never had a single human being walk in and join my congregation because of Worldview Everlasting. I've had them join other congregations, other Missouri Synod congregations, but never mine, right? And so it's not like the internet necessarily is going to fix the problems that you want fixed. And as pastors, I don't know if we've got others who are not pastors as well, church workers as well, we're always wanting the church to thrive, right? We want it to do well, but it isn't necessarily going to make that happen. It does present to us, though, again, tools we can use to enhance what we're trying to do. And to talk about this first, I want to talk about the philosophy of media ecology a little bit. This is the idea that how we communicate has an environment, and in that environment, whether at different times there's different ways that things work. And a lot of times when a new tool is introduced to a media environment, it takes a while for people to figure out what it's good for and how it works. And a great example of this is actually World War II, where you have these two military groups, the French and the Germans initially, in a land war, and there's a difference between their tanks. You have the well-known Panzer tanks of the German military, and then you have the French tanks. I don't remember now exactly what the name of those tanks were, but if you were a betting man going into this conflict, you would have had to put your money on the French tanks, not the German tanks. And everyone knows that Blitzkrieg, it just demolished the French lines, but no one saw it coming because the French tanks, they were bigger, they were stronger, and they had hardier guns. The problem was that they were still stuck in a military mindset that was pre-new media. That is, they conceived of these tanks as basically rolling cannons, and so they would move it into position beside their troops, and they would just sit there. What the Germans did with their smaller, weaker tanks that nobody was prepared for was they put radios in them. so that the people in the tanks could be able to talk to each other about where they were going, about where there was a weak spot in the line, and quickly maneuver their tanks so they no longer were just sort of cannons without horses to pull them. They became literally mobile attack forces. And that's why the Blitzkrieg did what it did, because the Germans understood social media's ecology and the tool, and they saw a way that tool could be used that nobody had seen up till that point. And now today, why would you not put a radio right in a military machine? Why would you not put a radio in your car? It's just obvious to us, but it's not always obvious what tools are good for right away. Another example of this was back in the age of the printing press. At the time of the printing press, which of course the Reformation really benefited from this, there was a major vocational crowd that was in danger of losing their entire livelihood because of the change of the printing press. And this was the scribes. Before the printing press, you know this, guys, that making a book was really, really expensive. You had to have one guy sit there and day in, day out write down what the words were, try not to make any mistakes, and by the time he was done, you did have another volume, but it was slow and it was costly. These scribes, though, were pretty well paid. They did well for themselves. And they, the communities in which they lived, they weren't hurting exactly. But when the printing press came along, it threatened that livelihood. Who's going to pay someone, I don't know, have the exact numbers, tons of money to do something that you can do very, very cheaply? So there's an abbot named Johannes Trithemius who decides he's going to fix this situation. Here's how he's going to fix it. He writes a book called De Laude Scriptorum, or In Praise of Scribes, defending the value of scribal culture and its benefits for the world, and how if we lose this social class, it'll mean the end of civilization. All these really strong arguments about how important scribes are. And then he printed it on the printing press and disseminated it to the area around him, which undid the very thing he was trying to do. He knew that he had something he wanted done, and the way that he used a tool not only undid what he thought he was trying to save, at the same time, it demonstrated the irrelevancy of his own point. And these are sort of moral stories for us as pastors and as Christians to recognize that if we misuse or misunderstand these new tools, they can get in our way. Sometimes it's better, if I could say this, and I'm going to come back to this later, sometimes it's better not to have a website than to have a bad website, right? If someone might visit you if you don't have a website. If you have a bad website, it might actually turn them off. We'll come back to that thought in a little bit. I missed a slide for De Laude Scriptorum. But the idea here is that these are tools, and not all tools work the same way. A hammer is not a screwdriver, is not a wrench. And I learned this the hard way, young dumb man that I was. I was trying to hammer in the last part of a nail somewhere, and somehow I had misplaced my hammer. So I thought, well, maybe if I use the back of this screwdriver, I'll be able to get this nail in. And all I did was manage to hurt my screwdriver quite a bit, as well as my hand, right? These tools are designed intricately because they're good at something, but they're not good at everything. And so the real task of the pastor or the church worker or the parishioner that wants to be involved with this internet is to learn how these tools work. And particularly even more so now that Facebook has become the massive communication tool that it is, the way in which not we all, but a whole lot of people communicate. We'll come back to that as well. How we present ourselves on that is another factor. How does written language work differently? Quickly, typed language work differently than spoken language, right? What's missing? How does email possibly create conflict just by nature of the way that email works? We'll talk about that too again in a moment as well. But the point here is, first, I don't have a silver bullet for you. I have the beginning steps in educating yourself on how to understand media ecology, how to know that there is such a thing as media ecology, and then how to begin to prepare yourself to engage it with wisdom, right? Which means learning from those who know a little bit more than yourself. Again, this is the Worldview Everlasting thing, and the idea that my churches didn't grow, even though I was seeing some fairly phenomenal for the LCMS kind of publicity via YouTube. It didn't have that effect at all. There is no magic bullet here, but what it did do, and because I like doing these things, I like being on the radio and whatnot, it did enable me to get that message of Christ to people. And if that's something you're into, that's great. There's tools for that as well. As you're doing that, it's gonna save the rural dying community in which you may or may not live. What's going to save them, right, ultimately is not us at all. Excuse me, I shouldn't have gone on. But is Jesus, right? And this is kind of the real threat. Whenever we have a first article good thing, right, something that God created or that we've created from the stuff God created in this world, which is good, it's useful, we have a tendency, this is our flesh, our original sin, we have a tendency to put more trust in it than it deserves and to look to it to be sort of the answer to our problems. I remember one time when somebody asked me a question, how are we going to save our congregation? I was a missionary pastor with a very small congregation that was on the verge of closing right as I walked in the door. And how are we going to save our congregation was the question. And it's like, you got to step back a minute. Isn't the congregation here because it's saved, right? I mean, don't we exist because Jesus did the work? Now, it's true. How are we going to keep the doors open? How are we going to keep the gospel being preached in this place? How am I going to reach people that seem to not care anymore about the things that are important? Those are fair questions, right? So I don't want to dismiss those, but we want to come at those questions from the right direction. So what's the internet actually good for? And this is kind of the big idea. If you can wrap your mind around this, and maybe you have already, you're going to be well on your way to knowing how to use it. The internet removes three things that used to be in the way of communication: distance, time, and cost. Right? Distance, time, and cost. It used to be that you could only communicate with people that were close to you. It used to be that it took time to make that happen. And it used to be that there was a tremendous cost to making it happen. And this goes even up to the level of television, in a sense. To produce television, you had to be in the same place, give a lot of effort to it, and spend a lot of money on it. The internet has shifted that rather dynamically, so that it's far easier to communicate via video like we're doing right now, kind of on the spur of the moment. You guys are all far-flung across the country, and we're having a face-to-face conversation as if I'm broadcasting TV to you, right? At a very cheap cost, by the way, compared to what it used to be. That's what's changed. And whether or not you can figure out in what way that applies to everything doesn't matter so much as you get then. What's the thing your congregation now has the tools at its fingertips to use to do differently? You can do things differently that used to require distance, but they don't anymore. That used to require time, but now necessarily don't need to anymore, and that used to be more expensive than they are. The cost ones may be a little less for the congregations, but the distance one and the time one are huge, particularly when it comes to things like how you organize your meetings, what business you get done before you get there. And you maybe are already doing this. My most recent parish, rather than send out a notice via paper about the upcoming elders meeting, the head elder always he'd send a text to a phone list of all the elders saying, just to remind you, this week's the elders meeting, and then again that day, just to remind you, this week's the elders meeting, right? That was a way in which he was using the tools to diminish the cost to his life and to the congregation's life. He was overcoming distance and trying to save time. I'll talk about that more at the end. We will get more specific at the end, especially as I try to take your questions. So let's see here. Maybe we don't need to worry about this so much. Yeah, just how much has changed since 1985. You think about Marty McFly there, if you ever saw the movie Back to the Future, and what the future was to them. It's just, again, time and space have entirely shrunk, and these obstacles have been removed from us. All right, I want to give you at least one more piece here of philosophy behind this media ecology that's really, really important if you want to do more than just organize, say, your congregational gatherings, because we got two things here. We got, how can I use the internet to be a much better phone book for my congregation than the phone book is, right? How can I use the internet to be a better phone book for the world than the Yellow Pages is for people trying to find my congregation? And the other side of it is, if I'm interested in producing creative content for the internet, how do I do that in such a way in which it's successful? We have a question we'll get to later that was sent in ahead of time about distance worship, which is a great question. It kind of actually hits both of those realities, but it is about producing content. And those are really two different questions, and they have different tools within the internet for them. Again, I'll try to throw you a list of tools at the end as well. But if you're moving toward that content creative side of things, there's this law of internet that you really gotta have, and it should drive what you do and maybe even when you do it. And I'm pulling this from a book. I'll give you the book at the end of the seminar, whatever webinar that we're having here. But it's called Publish Then Filter. which is totally a reversal of everything about creative content before the internet. Before the internet, you would filter things before you published it. That's why we have publishing houses. That's what they do. They filter content. They take the content, they say this is garbage, this is mediocre, this is fantastic. We will publish that after you've filtered. The internet allows you to publish before it's filtered. In fact, there really are no bars to publication, and this can in some ways be bad. It certainly allows anybody who wants to talk about how they think the entire dental industry is full of quacks and how you should use, I don't know, broccoli for your toothbrush instead. They can make a video about that if they want to, right, and put it out there. But there's something else that comes with this publish and filter reality, which you maybe don't assume is going to be there, and that is that as a general rule, quality is going to prevail over quantity. So as you're publishing without a filter, the world which receives this information, which is receiving these products, because they're able to chime back in, like you can't do this on TV, but you can like it on YouTube, you can like it on Facebook, you can share it, you can have an effect on the spread of it. The good stuff, the quality stuff, tends to actually rise to the top as the network kind of self-filters for you. That is, your gold is going to float, and your fecal matter is going to sink to the bottom of the pond. And so it's not necessarily a problem, but what you want to understand then is if you're going to produce content and you want it to float, it has to be good content. And this comes down to not only like what are you putting in your content, such as is your worship service something that's actually worth watching, right? Is the music well done? Is the preaching good? I know, of course, your preaching is good. I'm talking about the other guys in the webinar, not you, right? Yeah. Is your preaching good? Is it worth listening to? Are you taking care with the liturgy that you're making it understandable? Is the sound quality good? Is the video quality good? All those things really matter, because if you want it to float, if you want it to have an effect, then it's got to be at this higher quality matter. And needless to say, it better be true doctrine, right? It better be what the scriptures actually say. And this is where we do have an advantage, I think, as Lutherans, is that we do have good content in what we believe and why we believe it. We have a message that the world wants to hear. Maybe that's a little false doctrine right there. The whole world doesn't want to hear it. There are people out there that are hungry for it, though. There are souls that are starving for it, and we have a tool now to go and get to them. And so we've got an advantage. But what we don't want to do is then pummel that stuff to the bottom of the pond with how we produce it, with bad production value. As an example here, this was the old website at one of the congregations I served back in Philadelphia when I got there. I think this is the one. And it's heaven help us. It's designed in the 1990s when the internet was sort of a new thing, and that's what it is. It's a mess. It's a hot mess. And if I'm somebody who has any connection with the world today via TV and internet, I'm used to seeing things far more highly produced than this. So let's say I move into an area and I'm looking to come to your church, or looking for a Lutheran church, and I come along and I see this one. There's a good chance I'm going to go to the other one that has the updated website first, unless I've got a niche market kind of thing. Now, personally, I'd look to see, what kind of worship service is offered. Do you have a liturgical worship service where I can sing hymns with my kids? And if you don't, I'm probably not going to visit, right? That's me, right? But nonetheless, kind of the quality issue here is maybe even more important than that, because, how easy is it to find the information that I'm looking for? Now, you can see on this one that the worship services are listed there, but I'm pretty sure when I got there, it was just about the times and whatnot. So, and you can't really see the picture of the church and yada, yada. Publish, then filter. The idea, again, being that the network filters it out. No one's going to share this website because of how beautiful it is, right? They're going to pass by it. This was the Missouri Synod's Facebook page. We're probably at 4 years ago now. A much better initial impression, right? And it sends a message right away. Here's Jesus, right? He's what we're all about. And if you go there, they've done a good job here at facebook.com/TheLCMS. They've done a very good job of enhancing the way that you can use Facebook to share content. They don't publish 15-page long treatises into Facebook for people to read. What they do is they post pictures with little tiny quotes from our theology for people to see and find the picture beautiful and then get that theology from it as well, because that's the way that people go to Facebook. They don't go looking to read, right? They go looking for clips. And so that's just one piece of these tools and way to look at it. But again, trying to be wise and ask, what is the message that I'm sending? How am I crafting my website or my web presence to make that message seen right away rather than make people look for it? I think they've done studies now that if I've got to click twice to find the information I'm looking for, and I don't know if it's there for sure, I will leave your website before I click that second time. I should find it with one click if it's that valuable. Are your times easily found on the front page? Times of your services. Is that your Missouri Synod easily found? Is there a picture of Jesus, right? Those kinds of things, you want to have them be there right away. So now, if you're not into producing content, if you don't want to be someone who like has a podcast with your sermons on it, or talking with other local pastors about some idea or whatever, right? If that's not your thing, I want to tell you, great. Don't worry about it. You don't have to use a tool just because it's there, right? And if it's not your bailiwick to spend a bunch of time working with technology to try to find this, that, and the other thing, it's not a big deal at all. In fact, maybe better is to go sit down at the local coffee shop with the old boys that are sitting there that are members of your parish and have a chat, right? Talk about theology with them there, not in a recorded way, but in a way which serves them. And know this then, the network is going to do its work without you. This content that's being produced, Lutheran content, is going to keep coming even if you're not the one making it. The question then becomes, and this is an important question too, how do you make use of the content that's out there and get it to your people? Yeah. One of my questions as a new person here at KFUO is nearly 100 years old, and it's in its entire existence basically has served the St. Louis area. And now we have this potential to serve the entire Missouri Synod. The Missouri Synod has a radio station, right? But how do we let people know this? How do we let you know that it's there? How do we convince you that it's quality and that you want to give it to your people? How do you get it to your people, right? Those kinds of questions are important ones. What I struggle with then as a pastor, though, when I was in the parish, was certainly like, look, I've got this audio catechism that Issues Etc. did. How do I make use of this with the families in my congregation? How do I get them to start listening? Because I know that my 15 minutes of sermon a week isn't enough to wash out the white noise of the media complex of our age. How do I get them to just eat a little bit more? And one of the hacks I kind of came up with was I formed a Facebook group for my confirmation class. So all the confirmands and their parents were put into this Facebook group, and I started assigning homework. And the homework was simply this: I would post in the Facebook group a media something. It ended up being a lot of Issues, etc. I tried a couple other ones as well, but it was short enough. They had the 15-minute blocks or whatever that we could have somebody on talking about the pro-life march that was going to be coming up in the March for Life, or have somebody on talking about how atheism is doing this, that, or the other thing. And I would ask them to listen to this 15 minutes together at home, and simply to talk about it for 5 minutes when they were done. And I had one mother complain to me about one of them. She said, that one was really over my head. My son said he didn't understand it, and I said, I don't understand it either. And I kind of laughed. I said, yeah, but you talked to your son about how you both were wrestling with theology, right? You talked to your son about how you wished you understood what it was, right? And she said, yeah. I said, so you talked to your son about God? She said, yeah. Well, that's the point, right? I got you guys thinking about higher things, and not the organization, but just the actual reality, higher things together. One way to try to use these tools as a hack to get them in the hands of your people. So that's what I'm saying here, working with the network that already exists. Now, here's a couple of various ideas where you don't have to do all of these, but you might try one of them. You can create a profile for your church, right? So go to Facebook, and there's a way, not as a human being, but there's a way as an organization to create a profile. And then, probably with permission, but begin trying to connect your members to that profile, make them members, or get them to like it, or you can put them in that group, and then start doing Facebook not as yourself, but as that congregation, as that identity of the congregation, whether it's by putting out what you're reading in your daily devotions, what you find valuable, just as small snippets, or whether it's about using it to kind of manage upcoming meetings. Let's see if I have up here. One of the ways I tried this again, and it kind of worked. The problem was my Facebook Messenger was too loaded. It's because I was doing Facebook as me and not as the congregation. But I set up a Messenger group for the Altar Guild. And rather than try to do business all the time as Altar Guild, we just started deciding who was coming up for communion care next month in that little message thread. Saved us a whole meeting, right? All I got to do is shout out, who's got the next 3 months? Can we chime in? And the ladies would say, well, I can't do this month. I can do this month. And we would do it Again, distance was now no longer a factor, and time was no longer a factor. We didn't have to have the conversation at the same time, right? We could have it across time and solve the problem, right? So forming a messenger group, whether it's for your altar guild, you could do it for your elders. You want to be careful with sensitive information whenever you're putting it into print. But in general, if it's like, you know how elders meetings are, and you got the stuff that really matters that takes a lot of time to talk about, but then you got kind of this minutia stuff that you always have to deal with as well. You can deal with that before you get to the meeting by talking about it and coming up with a discussion and a decision together in a Facebook group or an email thread, an alias and whatnot. You can also start a discussion group for your confirmands where you chime in and you say, hey, comment on this, right? Now, confirmands, of course, are always a little tough to draw in, aren't they? But maybe your men's club or your LWML would like to do that. Of course, you can't force their hand. Not everybody's into the internet. But these are ways that you can start creatively using a tool like Facebook. A word of caution, especially for the clergy, about online presence. Whatever you put online, even if it's in a private message, although less so that, but even there, it is pretty much there for the world to see. All it takes is a screen capture of that private message, and boom, it's out there forever. And if you're chiming in somewhere and you're talking about how somebody's wrong about something and this and that, the challenge is not that you can't tell the truth, but that, as I said earlier, writing in e-quality, that is with electronic letters, has a tendency to come off harsher than you think it does. People put the worst construction on what they read on the internet. Now, of course, we should put the best construction on everything, but you can't hold everybody's hand all the time, and you find out that we don't, and you probably don't either, right? I know you can think back to at least one time when somebody wrote something in an email or somewhere, and you read it and you got angry, right? And what's the first inclination? Going to write right back and tell them exactly how they are wrong about this, that, and then what happens? It escalates, yeah? So if you're going to try to use these tools to gather meetings together and so forth, you really want to be careful about how you present yourself, right, as pastor or as congregation in the profile. And you also want to be careful about steering away from any conversation that is going to need a more cautious hand. It's one thing to decide, yep, we need a new printer, let the secretary go buy a new printer. We all say yes to that. It's another thing to deal with a highly emotionally charged issue, right? You don't want to be using these tools for that because it can actually make those issues worse. What about websites? I spent a great deal of time. It was about 3.5 months, maybe it was 5 months at my congregation in Naperville, Illinois, when I was there, trying to build a really high power website. We went through 2 different companies that we were paying money to every month to build the website. I tried learning an entire coding language myself because I couldn't get them to actually get it done. So I started coding myself, and then I found Weebly. And Weebly is not the only thing like this out there. There are others, but Weebly is my favorite because I found it first and because it's really easy. What Weebly does is it lets you build a free website initially with entirely drag and drop technology. That means you have a picture, and then you have a menu with things like title, paragraph, picture, and you just drag it and drop it. And what you see is what you get, right? So it's like if you can do Publisher or Microsoft Word, Weebly is almost easier than those things, and you can build an entire website. So again, I spent 3 to 6 months with 2 professional groups trying to build a website. I built it in 3 days. Exactly what I've been trying to do all that time in 3 days with Weebly. So I really recommend if you do want to mess with your website and you have even a smidgen of tech know-how, Weebly is so intuitive and usually user-friendly. You can buy a professional level one as well. You can pay money to have your actual web address that you want, as opposed to a weebly.com / the name of your church. I do recommend doing that for the sake of search engines and whatnot. It's not the end of the world if you have to have a weebly.com / website, but it's better just to have, Emmanuel Lutheran Church, Austin.com or whatever, if you can get something like that. But I really recommend, if it's not Weebly, or let me give you a couple more here. I don't have this in the thing because I just really learned about this a couple weeks ago, but if you write down wordsites.org, WORDSITES, wordsites, SITES.org. This is a group of Lutheran laity who are tech savvy, who are in the business of helping congregations build websites, and I believe is largely for free. Yeah. And their website's pretty spiffy looking itself, so it seems like they know what they're doing. Their whole purpose, their whole goal is to use their gifts as an offering, their talents as an offering for the church. So again, wordsites.org. If you can't handle Weebly yourself, you don't want total creative control, check that out. Concordia Technology, I believe, comes out of CPH. They also have tools to help you build a website. I believe you will have to pay a fee for that. If you're thinking about podcasting, again, if you want to put your sermons online, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, it may not have the whole world listen, but I found I was taking and putting my sermons online and then posting them on the Facebook page. I don't think I really got a lot of listens outside of my congregation, but members that had missed service, whole families that had missed service in this farming community in which we lived, they would listen to the sermon later that day or later that week, right? So it's a way to provide a service for your members as well. Podbean, you can Google that. Podbean is a really easy way to podcast. It's pretty, doesn't take a lot of effort. It's very intuitive as opposed to trying to figure out how to set up your own hosting site and things like that. Let's see here. One other idea, if you haven't found Google Calendar is a way of managing multiple calendars at one time that then can be kept private or shared with the world. And my personal opinion, for what it's worth, every congregation should pretty much have a Google Calendar and use it as their main digital calendar, and then make it publicly available on your website. It allows you to totally update in real time what things are happening. Let's say something gets canceled on Friday, you change it, it's up, it's done. People who are following that calendar will have on their own phone where they've plugged that calendar in, they'll see that it's no longer up anymore. You can even put in like it's no longer here because of this, right? So it's a way of real-time control of a calendar. A lot of times congregations will print their calendar like at the start of the month. And I remember my former parish, they would actually print the calendar about 2.5 weeks before the next month and then put it in the mailboxes at the change of the month. So the calendar, when you got it, was 2.5 weeks old. And by the end of the month, it was 6 weeks old. It was never right, right? It was constantly changing. So Google Calendar is a way around that. All right. So a word of warning about stepping on toes as well. Just beware that if somebody else is already dealing with media in your congregation, if you get there and you got someone else's website, people tend to take these things pretty personally. They put time into it. They put their energy into it. So you do got to be careful when you say, you don't want to say this website sucks, take it down. You got to kind of come in and work with people. But it's also a good reason, if possible, to not start down the path of letting volunteers in the church own the content. Right, if a volunteer is going to help build a website, it should be done in the name of the church, with the church office having access to that and proprietary control of that. So they can like teach how to do it and whatnot, but they shouldn't be the one who permanently manages it with their own passwords and whatnot. Because unfortunately, it isn't theirs, right? So you want to have those conversations. Again, a tough conversation to have. Let's see here. I don't know if that's really. I'll give you one more kind of cool idea for what it's worth. One of the ways that I kind of stumbled onto this at St. John and Oaks, what we had when I first got there, just this 2 years ago, they were still taking tapes to the shut-ins, who interestingly only had tape decks in their house for the tape from church. They all had CD players too, but they still had the tapes from church, and they would record those, and they would mass copy them and then send them out. The problem was when you have a recording of a tape, so we pushed record at the start of the service, you had 45 minutes, and so you'd get the sermon, but the service would turn off like that at the 45-minute mark, and they missed everything else. They missed the communion hymns, they missed the closing. There was no way they were going to get Bible study on that same tape. So what we started doing was we bought about $250 a digital recorder that we hooked up to the same sound system, which we had the most ancient sound system I've ever seen. You couldn't even plug things in to most of it. We hooked that up and began recording the entire service. And then with my iPhone, I began recording the Bible studies as well. All of that went onto an SD card. It's a thing that's about this big, which then plugged into a self-contained speaker that was built for Bluetoothing, that is connecting your phone to the speaker so you can like go to the beach and play music off your phone on the speaker. It was built for that, but it had this place for the SD card, so we push it in there. Our shut-ins, even our blind shut-in, had to push one button twice, and church would start, It would be followed by my Sunday Bible study. It'd be followed by my Tuesday Bible study. And then just for good measure, I started throwing issues, etc. on there. And I couldn't believe I came back the next month and asked her, what'd you think? And she was raving about it. And, she's been stuck with daytime TV forever. And now she's getting her faith fed. One more way these new tools can help you serve. Now, again, is serving your shut-ins and giving the time to helping catechize them even in their old age, is that going to necessarily grow the church? Is it going to pay the bills? No, it's not going to do that. But what it is going to do is fulfill the calling we have, right, which is to feed the sheep who Christ has given to us. And these tools, I tell you, man, there are so many creative ways we can use them. That's why I can't promise to give you all the possible ways, right? All I can do is kind of try to spark the idea with some of the theory. At the end of the day, though, wherever you are, even if it's just preaching the pulpit, publish then filter, right? Get it out there, speak it, keep calm, and stick with what we have. We have this gold, our dogma. And people don't like the word dogma. I like it just because I like things people don't like. I'm a contrarian, but I like dogma because it means truth, things that don't change. And most American Christians now, there are churches that don't have any truth. Like openly, like they say it, like, oh, I don't know. Ask Joel Osteen. I don't know. I'm not here to talk about sin. I don't want to hurt people's feelings. That's what most people have. We have truth, right? In Britain, young white males are converting to Islam simply because Islam says this is the way that it is, yeah? And they're wrong. We have the real thing. So keep calm. If all of this is too much for you, take it slow. Connect with word sites or Concordia Technology. You got those out there that can help you, particularly in those two groups. And keep doing what you know works. We don't save the church, yeah? God's word has saved the church, and now we have that message, and we know it works through preaching, particularly in the sacrament, which you can't get online no matter how hard you try, at least so far as I'm concerned. All right, a couple of resources before we go to questions. Most of the theory I'm giving you today is from this book, Here Comes Everybody by Clay Shirky, including this published then filter idea. So I highly recommend this book. Kind of really opened my mind to the possibilities of all of this stuff. Might even be cheaper than it is here. This is from a while back. Here Comes Everybody by Clay Shirky. A book here also not directly on target with what we're talking about, but so worth your time. If you're wondering why that 20 to 40-year-old crowd is so different than everybody else, what's our problem? And we really do have a problem. The narcissism epidemic is a pretty good treatment of how self-centered we are as a group, and how different that is from what we've had in the past, the expectations in past communities of duty, commitment, things like that just aren't there anymore among the young people today. So the narcissism epidemic, neither of these books by Christians, but at least openly, but very worth your time. And then a book called The Courage to be Protestant is by a Reformed guy, David Wells. Everything David Wells writes, though, is pretty much gold. He's got like 2 lines in here where he kind of knocks at baptism. He's wrong. But other than that, it's about standing on what you believe. Authenticity is kind of the catchword of the postmodern age, and everyone's trying to be authentic to draw in people. Well, what that means for a Christian is don't change who you are to try to win people over. It doesn't work, right? They can smell the deception in the pitch. They don't want to be sold their religion anymore. And if we can have the courage to stand on what we believe, we'll find that it actually has a pretty big impact. Very, very worthwhile book. Finally, sorry that the screen it adjusted the fonts for Windows and messed that up. But Strategy and the Fat Smoker is a book I was recommended a long time ago, not by a Christian. David Meister is, I believe, Jewish. But it's about organizations resisting the change that they need in order to thrive and even survive, and how the dynamics within various human organizations, he's thinking in a business culture himself, but the dynamics of self-preservation often end up doing the opposite of what we want them to do and constrict us so that we're unable to do what we want, and how what really is the most important thing in any change event, which includes preaching the gospel, is willpower, right? Courage. Really, really good read. I've tried to reread this one several times just because it's so good. There's another book out there called Broken that some guy wrote, but it's not nearly as important as your questions, so we're not going to leave it up there on the screen. But that's what I got as my official presentation. What's our time? Yeah, we got good. We got like 15, 20 minutes for questions here.
Yeah, we've got good time, and again, thank you, Pastor Fisk. It's some great information and wonderful resources. One of the technological resources you will have is at the end of our time today, you will be sent a link to download. So slides that it's hard to see maybe everything on there for the book. You'll get a link to that so you can actually see what those are because you'll get those slides. One of the questions that came up from Brian in New York is licensing requirements for recording. Obviously, if you record a sermon, that's not a big deal, but what about the rest with the hymns and liturgies and things of that nature? Can you speak to that?
I don't know if I should. I think the issue there, if you've got the licensing requirement to print it in your bulletin, which onelicense.net gives you, I believe, if you have the LSB Service Builder, you get that automatically as well. It shouldn't be a problem for anything that is. There's something called the fair use doctrine. And it's a gray, fuzzy line, and this is the problem with it. If it's not making you money or taking money away from them, you're pretty much safe. And then even if they were to find a problem with it, let's say there's a hymn that was written by somebody and his great-great-grandkid doesn't want you putting it on your live stream of your church service. His initial step is not to sue you. He's really not allowed to do that. His initial step is to tell you to no longer do it, to take it down. Right? So you've got an old service up, you just got to take that one service down, and you take it down. Yeah? And that's kind of the most trouble you're going to get into. So kind of depending on what you're doing, I mean, if you're going to put it on cable TV for 50,000 people to watch it, every week, and then you're asking for money all the whole time during the service, you're in a little bit of a different boat than if you're just trying to live stream your service for your shut-ins and set up a way for them to watch it. I wouldn't sweat that myself personally. There might be those lawyers in the Missouri Synod who would disagree with me on this, but that's just it. This is a gray area of law that is still in debate, and that's kind of the thing. With the change in technology, there's a debate about this going on, and you have two competing philosophies. I think that the published then filter reality is one that we can't really end up fighting against, and it will end up making new laws that kind of have to recognize this. But in the meantime, the current law is, again, fair use, and this is official record. If you're not stealing money from them in some way and they can't demonstrate that, then you're pretty much okay using it. And I would think particularly your singing in a live worship service is just being broadcast. It's not something, generally speaking, people are going to go back and find once it's over and a week has passed. It kind of dies with its use. That's a very different thing than taking it and doing a recorded CD that you're then selling, right?
Yeah, very good. Yeah, it really comes down to use, and that's really the important part. And kind of on that same line then, we had a question emailed into us about hardware, software for doing this kind of distance worship experience, like a live stream. Can you speak at all to that? Any experience you have with those types of setups?
Yeah, I'm not a hardware guy. Like, I do enough hardware to get by if I have to, but even with WeTV and here at KFUO, there's other guys that are majorly doing that. What's nice though is that the hardware at this point is so good, even at a cheap level, that you kind of should just experiment with it, and you're not going to lose a lot. I mean, if you spend $50 on a camera, like 15, 20 years ago, that was an investment, right? Today in your church budget, that's not a huge blip on the radar. I mean, obviously you want to be good steward. You want to make use of the money that we are given to in a good way. You don't want to be frivolous. But it's not like there's this massive risk involved either. And so in some ways, it's sort of a try it out and see how it goes. And again, it comes down to who are you trying to reach, how and why, and who's your audience. Are you recording this for local cable TV, or are you just trying to have it on your website? One of the best resources for any kind of technology, in my opinion, is Amazon.com. Not that you have to buy it there, but if you go there and you search for it, the user reviews are like better than Consumer Reports. You have tons of reviews, and someone very wise named Tim Ferriss, he's an entrepreneur podcaster. He said he never reads the 5-star reviews. He never reads the 1-star reviews. He reads the 4-star reviews. And if they don't have any of those, well, then there's a problem with the product. But the 4-star review, they're not so enamored with the product, they won't tell you what its drawbacks are. Yet if there's enough 4-star reviews, then you're going to know that it's a quality product. So I make use of that whenever I'm going to buy something myself for my personal use or whatever. The main thing also I would just say to that, and this goes with this other question about the distance worship experience that was written in, the most important thing in anything that you do on the internet with video is not the video. It's the audio, right? Now, you don't want to have it so blurry that nobody can see anything, but people are looking for good sound. If they can't hear you clearly, they're done. Yeah. We spent a lot of time this week actually trying to get me into this studio with the camera because we initially tried to do this off my laptop in our test run, and the audio was bad. And it didn't matter that my picture was fine. It was like, we're not going to sit here and do this with this bad audio. Yeah. And so I would say if you're going to emphasize something, even if you're going to video podcast your worship services, your sermons, spend the money on the audio. Make sure you got a high quality speaker, microphone. Preferably, if you're doing preaching, you want one of these things that goes around your ear. People call them the Britney Spears mic, and yeah, it's funny. I get it, but the thing about it that's really cool is when you turn your head. Like right now, can you hear the difference in what I'm talking? But if I had it right on my mouth like this, wherever I go, the sound never changes. Yeah. If you have it on your lapel, it's going to come and go in the recording with as you talk, and even worse if it's attached to the pulpit. So invest in a good mic. You can get a pretty decent. Don't buy the ones that are like $30 on Amazon. Those are horrible. I've tried. You waste your money. You need to go with about the $200 to $300 range wireless mics. Shure, Shuere is a good company. And it is an investment, but it will be worth your time if you're recording. Actually, it'll be worth your time in general, just with your sound in your sanctuary.
Yeah, very good. You really do get what you pay for, but again, a lot of things these days are far cheaper than they used to be. So when you invest in a good microphone, it is going to last a while. Unless you put it on my head, then I'm going to rip it apart because I destroyed a couple of those in the pulpit before. So anyway, Ronald Richter from Garden Valley, Idaho, he says to use all of this technology, the texting, the calendars, the devotions, etc., takes a tremendous amount of time. Is this the best use of a pastor's time?
Possibly not. Yeah, that's why I said maybe it's not what you need to be doing. Yeah. When I was again recently in small town America, Oaks, North Dakota, I was doing everything I could. We had a secretary who retired, and we brought on a new secretary. I was doing everything I could to give all of these things that I'm talking about to her. Yeah. Not she wasn't recording the services, but all of that management of the calendar, those kinds of things, and then also to various members of the boards, right? So I didn't send out the text to remind everybody to come to the meeting, but the head of the board did. So it doesn't have to be something that a pastor does, and if it's all of your time, then it probably isn't the best use of your time. Yeah. So again, it kind of depends on who you are too. For some people, this is going to be a very native thing. It's like I do this anyway, right? It's just kind of what I do, and I'm getting my job done. For others, it would be like I would have to give my entire life over to relearning how to think. And, you don't have to do that. You really don't. You maybe do want to be open to if there's another person in the parish who can, and particularly as you have turnover in the office, trying to hire at least one person who's down in that younger range, because you're going to find that, again, they're very native with it. It's just they've grown up with this, and so it's secondhand for them. But word about Facebook again. Is it the best use of the pastor's time to spend all day arguing on Facebook? No, it's not. It's not the best use of anybody's time to do that. There's an increasing amount of research from various secular sources showing that the amount of time you spend on Facebook is quite ruinous to your ability to get anything of value or quality done. Even if you're just checking every hour or so, even that going and checking, that distraction saps creative energy and personal energy from you that could be better used somewhere else. So I took the advice of a book called The 4-Hour Workweek by the same guy, Tim Ferriss, and I went on a Facebook fast, and I made it a rule that I would only check my messenger on Facebook one time a day, and I would respond right then to those that I needed to respond to, and that was it. And I haven't gone back. So I almost never check Facebook at all. I'll go look at the page that I manage for that reason, right? Or if I had when I was dealing with various membership things. But Messenger is one time a day, and then I'm done. I spend about 30 minutes on it, no more, because it was tearing apart my focus, right? It's like, what did I do for the last 3 hours? I thought I was working on this, and I'm about halfway done with it. I should have been done. Well, I kept hearing the notifications, the dings on Facebook, and going to see what was said. Right with that, turn off the notifications. You don't need notification on your phone when you get an email. You don't need a notification on your phone when you get a Facebook like or anybody connects to stuff on Facebook. You can set a time and go check those things later. You don't have to be on demand, and you'll find it actually really does change the way you're able to get work done when you're not trying to. People call it multitasking. It's not multitasking. It's being distracted.
Yeah, that's very true. That's very true. Excellent advice, and there are also some ways that you can. There are some there's some tech out there that you can use to actually eliminate a lot of that too. I know my wife with our youth, she uses Remind, and that way she sends out one text that gets to everybody that's the exact right group, and she's good to go. So it really does help. And that really goes to the next question too from James. Here he's one of our seminarians. We have a group of seminarians here doing a rural immersion from Fort Wayne, so we're glad to have those guys on today too in the other room. But he talked about the responsibility of the pastor and the idea of needing to maybe learn to do the web page or something like that. And I think you addressed that in, if it's not your thing, find somebody whose thing it is. They'll love doing it, and it won't be a burden.
The trick with the website is...
See, our next question...
Let me speak to that one.
Brian Smith, there are a variety of media options. Can you address swallowing the whole jug of water with social media, namely, how do you choose media? Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, which is the best way to go?
All right, so I guess I tried to interrupt you there. With the website, what I want to say is, I mean, which way do you go? The website is the most important one, by far, because it is the new Yellow Pages. It doesn't have to be with a lot of stuff on it. In fact, I would say the less you have on your website, the better. You want the primary information about your congregation. It's service times, maybe a picture of the pastor, directions. You don't want much more, but you do want something out there because it is how people find you now. Everywhere I go, every time I've moved, they leave the Yellow Pages on my doorstep, and I throw it away because at 38 years old, I don't need it. I don't use it. It's a big, wasteful book that's in the way. I use Google. Yeah, and so you want to be findable, and you need to find someone to give you that. In terms of the rest of it, yes, right, you can drown trying to consume all the social media. There is more media being produced now than a single human being could possibly consume in their entire lifetime. And I really mean even just today. There will be more songs, more movies, more books written and released and made today than you can get to in your entire life. So learning to set these boundaries are pretty important. And so some of that is, it comes down to a little bit about personality. Facebook may not be your thing, but you might really like Twitter. You don't have to like either of them. Personally, I don't get Snapchat at all. It's this thing where whatever I send you goes away. Like, what good is that? How do I help anybody with that? But the kids are really into it, so they like that thing. I should say on this, who's the real danger here is our youth. And if we don't teach them some form of media ecology, they can drown in this stuff. They can drown in the distractions, trying to help them find a way through it all. But in terms of church congregation life, I guess I would have to say Facebook's the one that really has the most potential after the website. And you go on from there and it gets increasingly less valuable. And the reason is, for better or for worse, we're stuck with Facebook. I don't really love everything about that organization, but they are like the college annual, or they're not even college. They are the annual of the world, right, or of the United States. If you want to find somebody who you went to high school with, Facebook will find them for you. You can go get them, right? So everybody's there. And so for that reason, it's pretty important that we be there too. And so whether it's just as a pastor having some involvement or as a congregation having a page, it'd be the place to go after the website. You need a website. You don't need Facebook. If you say, you know what, I'm nearing retirement and I got a ministry and these people are being served by me and I will wait for the next guy to come along and care about Facebook, good, right? This is not necessary. I would encourage you to find someone to get the website up, but other than that, ministry is where the word is, and you certainly can't get it onto every possible channel ever just today. You just don't have time for all of that, and helping our kids understand that is a major hurdle we have.
Very good. Another question here. Where is the best place to get images that we can put on our website? What are the licensing issues? And I would maybe add there also content if we're using Facebook and or the website and putting up pictures or content from our membership in our congregation. What about permission and licensing issues there?
Yeah, you got to be a little careful, especially with the real life pictures of people in your congregation. You want to make sure that they're okay with that. And, you would think it wouldn't be that big a deal, but it can really be a big deal. In terms of posting, like if you want to make a meme on Facebook, like just take a picture and write words over it and post it, you don't need to worry about licensing there. It's going to scroll through and disappear into the vacuum of media, the media void. If you're going to put it on your website, that's a little bit different. But if you just Google, now I'm going to lose the word. Oh, come on. license free. There's other words that are like this, but if you Google images and look for sort of duty free or license free images, there are places out there where you can find stuff that's like been put out there by creative artists who just want it to be used, and they say, yeah, go ahead and use it. You also can find places like PhotoBucket where you pay $1. Yeah, you find a picture you like, it's $1. You get all the rights you need to it. So when I'm doing stuff on blogs and I'm putting a picture on the podcast, and I'm putting a picture with the podcast itself. I personally don't worry about it too much. I just use Google Images. But if I was going to do something like, say, with Worldview Everlasting, and we're going to be asking for money, we're a little more careful with that, right? So again, it comes back to that fair use reality. If you're not making money on it, it's not as big of a deal. Your website then is different than your Facebook posts, yeah. And you just kind of got to go as you go. Again, PhotoBucket, if you really want to be rigid about it, PhotoBucket is a great resource. Professional photographers are using it, right? They're putting their photos out there because they want to make money, and it's cheap enough now. Distance, time, and cost, right? They're gone. It's a lot more easy to make use of these resources now. Have pro photographs, canned photographs at $1 a piece.
Good. I think maybe this question kind of goes along with this from George Smith. He says, do you use visual media in your sermons similar to what Worldview Everlasting?
Personally, no, I never did. And I don't know that I would want to. I can conceive of a world in which it's not evil to do so. But for me, this in some ways comes down to how much work it takes to put together a PowerPoint presentation. It's just insane to try to do that every single week. I'd rather spend that time studying the text itself. And then crafting. I even gave up on spending too much time crafting how I'm going to say what I say, and making sure I knew the content well enough to say it without having to read it. And that, if anything has happened because of TV, it's made us bad listeners. And this is a very secular first article thing, but I'm going to say that the single most important thing in getting people to listen to you is sustained eye contact. If you're not making eye contact with them on a regular basis, it doesn't matter what else you got. You can have smoke and lightning, coming out of your ears while you preach. They're going to tune out eventually. And so for me, the emphasis, especially in the sermon, is to not give them distractions, but to become a storyteller, right? To become somebody who's able to craft narrative and words from the scriptures about what they say, really using what they actually say to engage their minds. Is it possible to have a picture that would help? Yeah, but the amount of time and work you got to do to make that really pay off, to me, just doesn't seem worth it. It seems far more valuable to work on your ability to speak and to have a solid command of what you're going to say before you get up there. So I don't want to get into a screen bashing event or anything like that, but for me, it's a cost benefit thing. The benefit just isn't there. Like, they're really cool and flashy, yay, screens, but does the tool really do what we want it to do? If I have to stop my narrative to play a 9-second clip of a movie, in which we're waiting 7 seconds on either side for the movie to start and finish, why don't I just tell the story about the movie? I mean, am I a storyteller or not? Am I a preacher or not? So for me, that was always kind of where I would fall down on those things. I don't want to condemn you if that's what you're doing, that's what you're doing. But again, well, then if you're going to do it, learn how to use that media. I don't think I'll end with this. There's a movement in business culture now, which is basically saying no more PowerPoints for presentations, for webinars, no more PowerPoints, because they're shown that scientifically now, asking people to regurgitate coming out of the meeting what they were presented, they have less grasp of the topic than if you just used a whiteboard. So, is the tool actually doing what we think it's going to do? And if you want to actually study the science of media ecology, you'll find that not everything that has been brought into the church with the claim that it's going to be better has even the secular science to back it up. And I kind of think screens is one of them. Again, I don't want to condemn you. And could it be used? Yeah, it's just going to take you a ton of time to make it really work well.
And I think that gets back to the idea of how much time do you have to craft anything, and how much time you have to do things, and who's going to do what. And I think maybe we can end on this one too. Brian Smith writes in, I must admit I can very easily spend time on Facebook or updating our website, but my wife likes to remind me that especially if someone else can do it, I shouldn't be waiting on tables. So yeah, we really do need to weigh what we're going to do. Sip out of that water jug, if you will, and you don't have to do all of this all at once. We can wade in slowly, do a little bit very well, trying to do too much and do it poorly.
Be the best paid secretary in your town. That's kind of the question, right? And there's places where you got to do that. You got to clean the gutters. You got to fold the bulletins. That's fine, right? But what are you called there for? And how do you minimize that? Waiting on tables is a good reference to the scriptures there. How do you minimize that so that you can maximize what you are called there for, what you are trained specifically for, which is to bring that word to people, which isn't only in the pulpit, right? It's also in their day-to-day lives as well. And the more time I'm staring at this screen, the less time I'm doing that. And, guilty as charged. That was one of my great weaknesses as a human being, as a high-functioning introvert, is that I don't really like being around people that much. And so it was always a struggle for me. It's something that needs to be overcome. And as I was in the parish, I read books about how to manage my introversion, how to force myself to have conversations with people. There's a podcast called The Art of Charm, which is all about how to learn to be confident in conversations and engage people and basically overcome your introversion and your weakness. There are ways and tools like that are more valuable than sticking your nose in the website, which, again, build your website and update it once every 2.5 years. Get your Google Calendar in there, it'll automatically do it, and then leave it alone. It doesn't need to be changed. It's just a snapshot of what you are. Once it's there, it should be static. Right? Use Facebook if you want to do all sorts of stuff all the time. So, yeah, I don't know.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I think we're out of time for today. Pastor Fisk, we surely appreciate your knowledge and your wisdom, your being with us today. Just to give you an update on some upcoming events, we do have a few webinars coming up on December 8th, Enhancing Your Congregation's Educational Efforts with Dr. Mark Blanke from Concordia University, Nebraska. January 12th, we begin our Teaching the Faith series. We begin with Teaching the Faith to Youth. I'll be doing that webinar on January 12th. On February 23rd, we have the second Teaching Your Faith series for VBS. Vacation Bible School will be led by Kayla Ronfeld, a teacher at our Lutheran school in Denison, Iowa. We also have some other events coming up. On January 14th, we have an Engaging the Wandering event in Fremont, Nebraska at Trinity Lutheran Church. On the 21st of January, an Engaging the Wandering event in Humboldt, Kansas at St. Peter's Lutheran Church. On February 4th, we're going to be down in Crossville, Tennessee at Shepherd of the Hills Lutheran Church doing an Engaging Your Community event. And then also on February 18th, we'll be doing Engaging the Wandering in Deschler, Nebraska. So glad all of you joined us today. Blessings to you, Pastor Fisk, in your new call, a new endeavor at Worldwide KFUO. God's blessings to all of you in your ministry. And if you ever need any help, I think Pastor Fisk would be happy to be a resource, or give us a call here at the office, or drop us a note. We'd be glad to help you out. God's blessings to you all. Thanks for joining us.